The 1970s were a golden era for cinema, a time when movie stars weren't just celebrities, they were larger-than-life legends. They didn't have Instagram filters or PR teams carefully managing every word. What they had was raw charisma, real talent, and often some truly unbelievable stories happening behind the scenes. Today, we're taking you deep into the world of 70s movie icons, but not with the same tired trivia you've heard 100 times. No, these are the rare, forgotten, and downright bizarre facts that even hardcore fans might not know. From a leading man who turned down a role that could have changed Hollywood forever, to an actress whose on-set demands were so strange they became studio legend, to a director who had to smuggle his own actor past immigration officials just to finish shooting. This is the real behind-the-scenes magic of the 70s. So sit back, grab your retro popcorn bucket, and let's roll back the reel. In the 1970s, cinema was bold, experimental, and often unpredictable. It was the era of New Hollywood, when a fresh wave of young directors and unconventional stars shook up the industry. Big studios started taking risks, audiences embraced realism, and movie icons were born. But behind all that glamour and box office glory were moments, strange, emotional, and sometimes downright unbelievable, that most people never hear about. Let's uncover the 10 rare facts about 70s movie icons that will make you see these stars in a whole new light. 1. Al Pacino almost quit acting before The Godfather. Today, Al Pacino is an acting titan, the very definition of cinematic intensity. But in the late 60s, he was a struggling stage actor barely making rent. By 1971, Pacino was so discouraged he actually considered leaving acting entirely to become a carpenter. Then came The Godfather. Ironically, the studio didn't even want him. They thought he was too short, too ethnic, and too unknown for Michael Corleone. The role almost went to Robert Redford or Ryan O'Neal, but director Francis Ford Coppola fought tooth and nail for Pacino. When the movie hit theaters in 1972, Pacino went from being a broke theater kid to one of the most in-demand actors in Hollywood, practically overnight. 2. Robert Redford was nearly arrested filming The Sting. Robert Redford was Hollywood's golden boy in the 70s, rugged, charming, and effortlessly cool. But while shooting The Sting in 1973, he got a little too into character. In one scene, he had to run through the streets of Chicago in a rush. Problem was, they didn't close off the area properly. A nearby police officer, who didn't recognize him, thought he was a real criminal fleeing a scene. Redford found himself tackled to the ground by an actual cop before the crew could intervene and explain. The officer later admitted he had seen Redford in movies but didn't believe Hollywood people would just run around on public streets. Rare fact, that little unscripted adrenaline rush made Redford insist on doing more of his own stunts for authenticity. 3. Jane Fonda's Oscar almost didn't happen. Jane Fonda's 1971 Oscar win for Clute was a career-defining moment, but it almost never happened. Fonda was heavily involved in political activism at the time, particularly her controversial opposition to the Vietnam War. This made her a target of government surveillance, and according to declassified documents, her name was even flagged in FBI memos. In the weeks before the Oscars, there was a behind-the-scenes debate among Academy members over whether her political views should disqualify her. Thankfully, merit won out, and Fonda walked away with the gold statue. Rare fact, she didn't thank anyone in her acceptance speech, not even the Academy, as a silent protest against the war. 4. Jack Nicholson lived next door to Marlon Brando. And it got weird. In the 70s, Jack Nicholson was the king of cool, and Marlon Brando was, well, Marlon Brando. The two lived next door to each other in Los Angeles for years. According to Nicholson, Brando had a habit of borrowing things and never returning them. At one point, he borrowed Nicholson's expensive camera gear and used it to take hundreds of blurry, nonsensical photos, then gave the film back without a single explanation. Rare fact, After Brando passed away in 2004, Nicholson bought his house just to keep it from being torn down, saying, "It was something I had to do for my friend." 5. Burt Reynolds turned down James Bond. In the mid-70s, after Sean Connery stepped away from the Bond franchise, producers were scrambling for a replacement. One surprising candidate? Burt Reynolds. Reynolds was offered the chance to be the first American James Bond. His reason for saying no? He told them, "An American can't play James Bond. It just can't be done." Rare fact. He later admitted on The Tonight Show that it was one of the biggest career mistakes of his life, though he joked that Bond's suits would have been way too tight for me anyway. 6. Diane Keaton's wardrobe in Annie Hall was her own. When Annie Hall hit theaters in 1977, Diane Keaton's quirky menswear style became instantly iconic. Wide ties, loose vests, oversized jackets. But here's the thing. Almost all of those clothes were hers. Director Woody Allen initially objected to her too quirky fashion sense, but costume designer Ruth Morley convinced him to let her dress herself. The look went on to influence 70s fashion trends for years. Rare fact, Keaton's real name isn't Diane Keaton, it's Diane Hall. Annie Hall was literally named after her. 7. Harrison Ford was still a carpenter. When he got Star Wars, Harrison Ford might have been Han Solo in 1977, but just months earlier, he was making his living building cabinets. He had acted before, but work was slow, so he went back to carpentry to support his family. George Lucas originally brought him in only to read lines with auditioning actors, but Ford's sarcastic delivery caught Lucas's attention, and suddenly he was cast in what would become one of the most successful movies of all time. Rare fact, Ford built a recording studio for Sergio Mendes during the same period he was filming Star Wars. 8. Sylvester Stallone refused to sell Rocky unless he starred in it. When Stallone wrote Rocky in 1975, studios loved the script but didn't want him in the lead. They offered him up to $360,000 for the rights, a huge sum for someone who had less than $200 in his bank account. But Stallone refused unless he could play Rocky Balboa. The gamble paid off. Rocky won Best Picture in 1977 and made him an overnight star. Rare fact, Stallone sold his dog, Butkus, for $50 when he was broke. After getting the Rocky deal, he bought the dog back for $1,500. 9. Faye Dunaway's on-set rituals were legendary. Faye Dunaway was one of the most glamorous stars of the 70s, and one of the most demanding. Crew members often joked about her Faye rules. She reportedly insisted on a specific brand of imported mineral water to be delivered on set, and if it wasn't the exact one, she would refuse to come out of her trailer. Rare fact, on Chinatown, she demanded her character Evelyn Mulwray's hair be styled with actual 1930s hairpins from antique stores to ensure accuracy. 10. Gene Wilder almost didn't take Willy Wonka. Gene Wilder's portrayal of Willy Wonka in 1971 is pure magic, but he initially turned the role down, until he made one unusual demand. Wilder told director Mel Stewart he would only do the movie if his first appearance involved walking slowly with a limp, then doing a sudden somersault. When asked why, Wilder said, "Because from that moment on, no one will know if I'm lying or telling the truth." Rare fact, that scene was never in the script, and it became one of the most beloved moments in film history. The 1970s weren't just about great movies, they were about the people who made them unforgettable. These stars weren't polished, perfectly managed celebrities. They were flawed, passionate, and often unpredictable. And that's exactly why we still remember them decades later. From near arrests to bizarre on-set habits, these rare facts remind us that movie magic isn't just what happens on the screen. It's also what happens when the cameras stop rolling. If you loved this trip down memory lane, hit that like button, subscribe for more 70s nostalgia, and ring the bell so you never miss our next deep dive into Hollywood's golden era.